Chapter 24.
"What's taking the queen so long to get here?" Jabir asked, rubbing his nose. "I's getting hungries again." "I hear something," Zohar said, waving his hand. "Does you want us to goes back to the babies?" Alice asked, worriedly biting her lip and picking up her bow and arrow set. "No, we's might need you here," Zohar said. "I sees my daddy," Jade laughed. "Our daddies are going to help us," Amber said excitedly. "Why's mine got colors all over him?" Rome asked, puzzled. The kids backed up closer to the end of the ride and waited until it drew to a stop. Each of them watched in confusion as the men piled out of the ride, looking somewhat like they had already been in battle. "Phoenix?" Spring cried out when she saw her sister. The two little girls rushed to each other, wrapping their arms around the other and falling to the ground in a fit of giggles. Both were talking so fast that no one could understand what they were saying. Only when Creon stepped closer did they release each other and stand up. "I was telling Spring about how you was fighting the balloons in the kitchen," Phoenix explained. "I did the balloons," Alice beamed. "It makes you pretty."
"Yes, it made us all pretty," Haven growled, picking Alice up in his arms and swinging her around in a circle. "You and I have to talk about your balloons and a few other things."
"Are you mad at me?"
Alice asked. Her bottom lip trembled and she stared at Haven with huge, worried eyes.
"I's just trying to protect the babies."
Haven's gaze softened. "No, I'm not mad at you," he whispered. "But I think we'd better talk about some of the things you can do that you forgot to tell Mommy and me about."
"Okay,"
Alice said, wrapping her arms around her dad's neck and squeezing him.
"I can do lots of things."
"I know you can," Haven murmured with a sigh, his gaze locking with Zoran's. Zoran turned when he felt a slight tug on his pants leg. Looking down, he saw his son standing there looking at him with dark, golden eyes. He knelt and rested his hand on Zohar's thin shoulder. "I should have listened to you," Zohar said in a grave voice. "I'm proud of you."
"I's a leader likes you, Daddy," Zohar said. "I's had lots of helps from the others, though."
Zoran gazed around the room at each of the other men. They were laughing and talking to the younglings. Viper was teasing Rome about the paintballs and how he had booby-trapped his dad. Cree and Kalo were standing and chatting with Paul about how creative the kids had been, and that they were looking forward to the day when Hope would be old enough to join Morah and Leo on their own great adventures. While Keelan and Mandra listened avidly to Balint and Jabir describing how they had planned out everything. This was what it meant to have a family. This was what it meant to have friends. He turned his gaze back to Zohar, who was watching him, and smiled. "Yes, you did have a lot of help. That is what a good leader does," Zoran said.
"We's waiting for the queen," Zohar explained. "Are you going to help us?"
Zoran stood up and lifted Zohar in his arms. He was about to explain that the queen was just make-believe when the loud sound of thunder shook the room and the lights flickered. He turned in surprise to Traylon. "I didn't program that," Traylon muttered, turning to look at the throne that was beginning to glow. "Or that." Everyone turned and watched in amazement when a ghostly doorway appeared and a figure walked forward, followed by several other strange-looking creatures. Behind the figures, they could see what looked like all different types of creatures in the background and a large black castle. Zoran carefully lowered Zohar to the ground and stepped in front of him. "Who are you?" he asked, glancing once again at Traylon, who shook his head in confusion.
"I am the queen of the symbiotes," the majestic figure said, with a wave of her hand.
On either side of her, large replicas of the miniature figures that Jade and Amber had created moved to the side.
"I am from the land of Halloween."
Zoran, I did not program this," Traylon muttered out of the side of his mouth. Zoran nodded. "What do you want?" he demanded. The figure descended the steps and bent to smile down at Zohar, peeking out from behind Zoran's leg. Zoran immediately dropped his hand down to shield his young son. His other hand moved to the knife at his waist, but something told him that the figure in front of him was not a threat.
"I came to say thank you," the Queen whispered, "for sharing with me the beauty of your friendship and love." "You likes my sparkles?" Alice asked, stepping away from Haven. "And my mirror?" Phoenix asked. "I's just had dirty worm silk, but it's fun to plays with," Spring said. "Yes, it is very fun," the Queen laughed, turning her attention to Phoenix. "And your mirror to the universe was beautiful, and showed me there is much more out there than just the land of Halloween. Alice, your sparkles lit up the land and made everyone very happy. The ghosts and ghouls and monsters really love your balloons," the Queen added. "I can give you some of my tickle bugs," Jabir offered shyly. "That's all right, Jabir. I wouldn't want to take your tickle bugs," the Queen assured him.
"Oh, you can take them," Mandra insisted. "I know where you can find dozens of them."
"Yous do? Can I have more?"
Jabir asked, turning to his dad with a hopeful expression.
"No, I really don't need tickle bugs. Halloween has enough mischievous creatures, thank you," the Queen responded. "I can show you hows to make booby traps," Rome said. "My mommy showed me how to make them." "They are lovely booby traps, too," the Queen chuckled. Jade and Amber were whispering frantically to each other and glancing at the Queen before they both stepped forward, wringing their hands together. The Queen stared into the eyes of both little girls and waited. Jade finally released a breath and spoke first. "We's got our own minions, but they are a parts of Simba, so we can't give you those," Jade said, glancing at her sister. "All we got is a broken robot in the ballroom," Amber said, glancing at her dad. "He's only a little broken, though." "Yeah," Jade said, with a hopeful smile. "He walks like this."
Everyone laughed as Jade walked around with her mouth open, dragging one leg and moving one arm funny. She stopped and looked at the Queen with a serious expression. The Queen reached up and tenderly touched Jade's cheek. "I think a broken robot would be perfect for the land of Halloween," the Queen whispered. "You are truly a wonderful friend." Jade threw her arms around the Queen's neck and held her tight. Slowly, one by one, each of the other children came forward and wrapped their arms around her as well. The Queen closed her eyes as a wave of emotion swept through her.
"I knows who you really are. Yous will be all right," Phoenix whispered to her. "I's going to miss you, though."
The Queen bowed her head and pressed her lips against Phoenix's forehead.
"I will miss you too, little one," she whispered,
standing up and stepping back.
"Thank you, my friends, for everything."
Zoran and the others watched in disbelief when the figure waved her hand and stepped back through the doorway that had reappeared. She glanced back once, her eyes holding Zoran's for a long moment before she bowed her head in respect.
"The Valdier, Seraphim, and Curacin have grown much since I first came to this world," she whispered. "Your bond will keep you strong. I must go, but there are others of my kind who will watch over you."
Her gaze turned to Creon, and she smiled at him.
"Fear not for your daughter, warrior. Her future may already be written in the stars, but she is stronger than you realize."
Creon's throat worked up and down. His shoulders tightened protectively on the small shoulders of his two daughters as the figure turned. The other creatures that had come with her jumped through the doorway just before it disappeared, leaving all of them standing there in silence. "What was that?" Viper finally asked.
"That was Ikaterina. She's my friend,"
Phoenix answered, turning to look up at her father with dark brown eyes filled with sadness.
"Daddy, I's hungry. Can we get something to eat now that the babies are safe?"
Jabir asked, breaking the tense atmosphere and mobilizing the men into action.
Let's go feed the kids before the women get back, Paul suggested quietly.
Back in the control room, Dulcie sat back in the chair and shook his head in amazement. For almost 2 hours, he had been glued to the screen, watching the events unfold. What had begun as a final check of the camera system had quickly turned into an adventure straight out of the archives. When he had first noticed the dragonlings and the other royal family's younglings in the throne room, he had been shocked and dismayed. He had quickly scanned the area, searching for signs of their parents. A smile tugged on his lips, and his gaze moved to the screen where he was replaying the vidcom footage. In fascination, he studied how the dragonlings, the Seraphim cub, and the Kurazin princess all worked together. It didn't take long for him to realize what they were doing. It was the way they were doing it that he couldn't figure out, at least not until the very end, and he realized he was seeing something extraordinary, even magical. Reaching over, he saved the video footage to a disk and slipped it in his pocket. He would store it in the archive for safekeeping. His gaze moved back to the group of men. Deep down, he felt his dragon stir and whimper. "I know, my friend," Dulcie murmured in a soothing tone. One day we will have a chance to find a true mate for us. Until that day, we will help Lady Kara and watch over the younglings as if they were our own." Dulcie rose from the chair when the last of the group exited the castle and gave the command to shut down the program. Reaching for the comlink attached to his waist, he gave a brief order for a cleanup crew to go through the castle one last time, with specific instructions on how to deal with some of the items they would find. Tomorrow, the ride would be ready for the festival. He fingered the disc in his pocket, wondering if he should share it with Lady Kara. He knew it would only be a matter of time before the mischievous and brilliant human female discovered what had happened. Looking out the window of the control room, he watched the men walking quietly back along the path. The younglings were running around, playing and excitedly talking. His eyes lit on their faces. "You no tell on them, will you?" his dragon asked with a snort. Dulcie released a soft chuckle and shook his head. "Lady Kara will find out soon enough. We should just be thankful that we weren't there," he replied. "We go find us mate," his dragon growled. A devious smile curled Dulcie's lips, and he fingered the disc one more time. After several long seconds, he shrugged his shoulders. What did they have to lose? There was a warship leaving for Lady Kara's homeworld in a few weeks. Maybe he could make a deal with the dragon lords to be on it. "How would you like to go see if we can find us a mate?" Dulcie silently asked his dragon. "About time," his dragon growled with glee. "Yes, it is about time," Dulcie replied, stepping out of the control room and heading back down to the floor of the cavern.